everybody. Welcome back to the Silver Screen Action Figure Podcast. This is your host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions. It's the Halloween season, so as promised, I'm going to deliver on a particular topic that will fit today's season. And today we are going to be talking about the action figures based on the 1988 classic Beetlejuice, which starred Michael Keaton, Alec Baldwin, and Geena Davis. And this was also the second feature film blockbuster of Tim Burton a year before his big success with Batman, and only about 3 years removed from his debut smash, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So let's go back to 1988, and I can give you a little bit of a personal context with this movie, because what we're going to talk about is really one of the most bizarre ideas for a toy line back in those days. One that was not your typical G.I. Joes versus Cobra or Ghostbusters versus a bunch of ghosts type of line. We're talking about a movie that really began as a comedic take on the typical haunted house story. So this film, as I remember, I used to go to my grandmother's house all the time, every time that my parents had to work and if I wasn't in school. And I remember it was around the spring of '88, and you had these TV advertisements for this movie Beetlejuice. And by the way, this was the first time I ever heard of Michael Keaton. I had not seen Mr. Mom, I had not seen Gung Ho or Night Shift. I was too young to see any of that stuff. So I must have been about 5 years old at that time, or probably 4 going 5. When I saw this commercial, and it was showing all the big highlights of everything that Beetlejuice could do. It had the part with, Robert Goulet going through the ceiling, and the Otto character, losing his pants. A lot of what I thought was scary imagery to me as a kid. So every time that commercial came back on, I'd run out of the room, scared shitless. Ironically enough, that was the original title of the movie. It's actually called Scared Sheetless. And so it was one of those movies that obviously there was no way I was going to see this thing. And I was that kid that was into Ghostbusters, even though I had not seen the original Ghostbusters movie yet, just a cartoon, Ninja Turtles, all that stuff. Then the movie came out on video later that year, and my parents had rented it. And I guess I must have snuck into my parents' bedroom to watch it. And it turned out not to be so bad. Instead, it was more imaginative in Tim Burton's style, doing stop motion effects, the creative aspect of the Nita world, as they call it, or at least I think they called it that later in the cartoon. And, just all these little, kind of wild imagery. It really wasn't scary as it was just funny, and very imaginative. And Michael Keaton, who only has really, in total, maybe 7-10 minutes of screen time, he really comes across like a bolt of lightning in this movie. And it became a definitive character, of course, before Batman, that would resonate with the public and become an icon for decades to come. And a movie that became a franchise without even having sequels to it. So for all you millennials that never saw the movie, it basically, the original story involved this suburbanite couple, the Maitlands, played by Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis. They live in their little Connecticut country home, and one day they end up in a car accident. And they come home not knowing until they see the real estate agent having their house get shown around that, wait, they died in the accident. So they're stuck in the house. It's what the hell are we going to do? We're dead. We're just a bunch of ghosts. And then in comes the Dietz family, these New Yorkers that come and live in the house. They have their daughter Lydia, who's kind of on the gothic side, and she's almost kind of aware of their presence there. But the way that her parents are rearranging this quaint Connecticut house and turning it into this postmodern-esque art place, and really, taking away the aesthetic that the Maitlands loved, they want to push them out. They'd rather have a nicer family living in their home. And then the next thing you know, in this particular Neither world, they're looking for ways to try to scare them out, but none of their tactics work. So that's when they hear about this bioexorcist that only goes by the name of Beetlejuice. And you can't say his name without him coming out unless you say it 3 times. So every time you say Beetlejuice, 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 he comes out and, you know, he's willing to make a deal to help them with their problem. And little twists and turns happen where the Maitlands, of course, begin to realize the deeds aren't so bad. But Beetlejuice has his own plans to come back to life by somehow, getting Lydia to win his trust, only so he could come back to life, marry her, and the hell with everybody else. I think that's kind of general what the story was about. And it was written originally to be a much darker picture, and actually Wes Craven at one time was attached to direct it, but then he did the movie Deadly Friend, and that didn't do all the box office, so he lost the gig, and it was given to Tim Burton, who brought it to shape and made it into the movie that it became. And he actually wanted Sammy Davis Jr. to play Beetlejuice. That was like his number one choice, but the producers suggested Michael Keaton on the basis of his comedic work, although he was in a box office slump at that time, so there was some uncertainty if he could pull it off. But after having a conversation with Burton, he realized, wait, this guy could exist at any time, any place. There's really no limit to who he is because he's dead. He's a ghost. So he fed on that. And a lot of what you see in that movie with the hair, the makeup, the striped outfits, that was all Keaton, and in collaboration with Tim Burton. And so you had a classic right in the making, and it certainly resurrected Keaton's career before it started to really take off after that with Batman. And it really was also the film that turned Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis into big movie stars and propelling their successful careers going into the 90s, as well as Winona Ryder playing Lydia in the film. And she hadn't done much up until that point, and then all of a sudden, now she was going to become like almost the face of Generation X. So Beetlejuice was a massive hit, and weirdly enough, it became a franchise all of a sudden. So the following year, ABC decided to do an animated series, but they decided to change the complete direction of the storyline. So it doesn't really fit in continuity with the film. Instead, they got rid of the Maitlands altogether. And now Beetlejuice, who was really the antagonist of the movie, is now the good guy. And he's best friends with Lydia, who he was trying to, do bad things with. Now they're like buddies going between her world in that house and then going into this place, the Neither world, where you have all the ghosts and creatures and the big scary worm and, all kinds of different adventures that they get into and all kinds of problems that Beetlejuice causes. And it was a big hit. It actually lasted quite a while. And it was on ABC for a while. Then I remember it was on Fox. So it had a couple of seasons and they won a couple of Emmy Awards. Tim Burton was also a producer on it. So that also made Beetlejuice popular with children, because they did tone down the movie from there. And yeah, it just was like one of those things that started to spawn out video games for like the Nintendo and Game Boy, which were terrible. And just also Universal Studios, they had like their monster attraction, and they would have people dressed up as Beetlejuice, singing songs with the Universal monsters. So it was a serious deal back then that he was so iconic. So if you're going to have a franchise like this, then you might as well make action figures. Even though it was a little odd to do that with this movie. Like, how do you make action figures for Beetlejuice? Well, in comes Kenner. Kenner having big success with the real Ghostbusters, and they had just had gotten the rights for the Police Academy toys. They decided to do a Beetlejuice line starting in 1989. So, in getting into those figures, let me give some context here in that the first set of toys were primarily based on the movie, not the animated series. So we had 6 figures in the initial set. We had actually 3 different takes of Beetlejuice, all of which were somewhat based on the movie. You had Showtime Beetlejuice. Now that's the one that's in the traditional striped outfit with actually his head done almost like, one of those carousel rides like they had in the film. And I gotta say, they really did an excellent job on all of these figures in terms of the look and the likeness. They really got Michael Keaton's look correct. The costumes are deadly accurate, and I even love the accessories, like the little bugs that these toys would come with. They were all like little insects with his head on it. It just added to the imaginary mystique of Tim Burton's world, as I'd like to say. When I got this figure, I also got the Spinhead figure, which is Beetlejuice in his red tuxedo, which if you remember the end of the movie, when he's trying to marry Lydia, like he suddenly switches into this. And that one has the traditional Beetlejuice look with his hair all out, and obviously the Michael Keaton look. I would switch the heads on these because I was so used to the way he looked in the movie poster. I would take the spin head Beetlejuice head and I would put it over the Showtime Beetlejuice. And also to add, with those two figures in particular, when you remove the heads, they would have the shrunken head Beetlejuice in it. So if you remember at the end of the movie when he's in the receptionist area and he gets cursed by the little voodoo creature and his head shrinks, it's a trademark of that. It's based on that particular scene. So those were two of them, and then the other Beetlejuice they had was the shish kebab Beetlejuice, and this one had basically he's stabbed all up, and he's almost dressed like a French painter. Don't ask me why. But with this figure, it's interesting because I believe this one is supposed to be based on that scene in the movie when he has the spikes come out of his chest and then he starts dancing around. Even though it's not what he wore, what he looked like in the movie, but still, it was kind of like a nod to that and kind of cool to have. And those were your main Beetlejuice action figures in the first set. Now we get into the other characters, all of which were in the film itself. We got Adam Maitland, the Alec Baldwin character. So this one is a little more bizarre to me, and I'll tell you why. So with Maitland, they did one cool thing was in the film where he's trying to scare the Deets, he stretches his face like with a huge Pinocchio head and like a mohawk. So it actually had like a separate accessory where it's a mask and you could put it over his head. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing, and it's accurate to the movie. He comes with a Beetlejuice worm, so it's got Beetlejuice's head in a worm form, and they call it the creepy crawler. And another cool feature is, first of all, he has the checkered shirt from the movie. He's got tan pants. His face, while it doesn't quite look like Alec Baldwin that much, I mean, it's still kind of nerdy looking. He's got the glasses on, and his head could slide down to the end of his arm, which is kind of creepy. And I remember I had some issues with that when I was playing with it as a kid. The only thing that always bothered me about Adam Maitland was he's wearing a baseball cap and it's backwards, like he's supposed to be some hip hop artist from Def Jam, or maybe even some kind of hipster from Brooklyn. It was so odd because he never wore a hat in the movie. What the hell were they thinking with this? Unless they were trying to fit it in with like the cartoon, maybe some weird design that they decided to scrap. Who knows? But it was just like one of those strange ideas to just inject into it. If I ever talk to somebody that worked for Kenner back in those days, I'm going to ask that question. Why the hell did you put a red cap over Alec Baldwin's head? Give me a break here. We had Harry the Haunted. So now we're getting into like some of the lesser known characters in the film, but you only know them just by seeing them in the movie. Harry the Haunted, he was supposed to be, I guess, some game hunter from Australia, and he was like one of those deadites inside the reception area. Like when the Maitlands are going and asking about the handbook for the afterlife or the handbook for the living dead. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've seen the movie. But with this guy, like he looks like what he did in the movie. He also has a Beetlejuice tarantula with the Beetlejuice head. And just like with Beetlejuice himself, you could take off his head and it would be like this shrunken, strange looking creature. And actually, that's what was depicted in the film. Like the regular head that it puts over is like some guy with a blue face who looks like a Kree from a Marvel movie and an arrow through his hat. So I'm guessing he was killed by an arrow in the head. Uh, that's all I'm going to say about that one. Then we had an interesting character of Otto the Obnoxious. So Otto, he was played by an actor named Glenn Sadix, who sadly passed away many years ago. He was like the one guy living with the Deets who was kind of like really creepy, and he also, like Lydia, believes in the whole afterlife thing. And when he gets his hands on the handbook, he's the one that ends up trying to bring the Maitlands back to life, but only just to prove his point that this stuff exists, not to help them in any way. And I would say maybe if there were villains in this set, he was probably the closest to it because his character was definitely not likable. And like I said, it's been a long time since I played with these, but I remember I had him. I had that whole set, as I recall, and I would take those toys and I would actually not only used them with the Ghostbusters figures since they were the same size, but I also used them with the Ninja Turtles. I'll get more into that in a second because I'll tell some personal anecdotes more about the Beetlejuice figures here. The second set, there wasn't much. There were only two figures in this line. One of the figures, and they're both Beetlejuice toys, one of them, it explodes. So it's the exploding Beetlejuice. He is in the striped outfit, but now it's in like this glow in the dark kind of color. And the figure, basically, that the torso could split apart into two, and then you would end up seeing his insides. And supposedly, they say he turns into a flying beetle. I don't remember that. I think he just exploded, and then all you saw was like purple guts, and it was like a bug body of some kind. Kenner's been notorious for this. They would use the same type of design for Terminator 2 with the T-1000 when it would explode, and it would be like the inside would be the liquid metal. So that was that. There was Shipwreck Beetlejuice, which I did not have, and as it was described, it basically has its arms fly up and tentacles leaping from his head. So I think that was supposed to be a payback from, or callback to the movie. There's like that one shot when he's actually scares the Maitlands, and it's like from the back of his head, and like these worms come out of his face, but you never see him from the front. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be something along those lines. And then later, they had a set of figures called the Neighborhood Nasties. The Neighborhood Nasties basically look like a rejection of Ghostbusters ghost toys. I never collected any of these, and as far as I'm aware, they were not in the movies and they were not in the animated series. And I did not collect any of these figures whatsoever. So what we had here, we only had four of these particular toys. There was the Hungry Hog. He was basically a man pig who eats on a corn cob. Go figure. There was Street Rat, and Street Rat looks like a punk rocker, skinny arms, skinny legs, and supposedly he was like a Beetlejuice bad guy. There was the old Buzzard. The old Buzzard was an old man that essentially could pull apart, and then the inside he turns into a vulture that feeds off of a dead chicken. Okay. Then lastly, we had the teacher creature. So this is like some creepy old lady that basically has an apple bomb and also looks like it turns into a bat. I mean, this is the first time I was seeing some of these. This is just like weird. My assumption is I think the fans of the toys were probably complaining about not having any villains for Beetlejuice to stand up to, so they just created these random ghost characters so he could actually have somebody to be an enemy to. I don't get it. like I said, these toys look like they could have just easily have been part of the Ghostbusters toy lines, and you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference because they do exactly everything that they do. I mean, hell, the old Buzzer is basically like the garbage man from the Ghostbusters toys, one that ends up turning into like a flying creature. Now, this set would not be complete without vehicles and accessories. There were no play sets for this movie. However, we did get what I thought was one of the coolest types of small miniature play sets at that time, and that was the Vanishing Vault. This was a toy that I had so much fun playing with as a kid. So, what you would do is you would have Beetlejuice's grave, which is actually deadly accurate to the grave in the film, and you would open up this vault, you would put your Beetlejuice figure inside of it, close it, and then magically, when you reopened it, there would be a little micro Beetlejuice, like an Ant-Man sized Beetlejuice. And you could do it basically with any of the Beetlejuice toys. Now, this is probably one of those little magic trick boxes that magicians tend to use, but it really was cool. And just like in the movie, it even has like the Beetlejuice neon light sign that's pointing down at the grave. It's got some little stickers on the inside, and I still have this. It's kind of broken apart, but it's still like one of the most fun accessories. Just not even with Beetlejuice, but just in general. I had that for Christmas, and I was just nonstop. Me and my cousin were playing with that thing for 2 or 3 days straight because it was so addicting. Next, we had the Phantom Flyer. So this was a Beetlejuice motorcycle with a skull in the front, and it has like these wings on the back that could flap down. So if you want to make it look like it was flying, it would turn into wings and glide. Um, it was kind of cool little vehicle. It wasn't in any of the movies. It might have been the animated series, but I could be wrong. And then lastly, we had the Creepy Cruiser. So this was not in any of the movies. It might have been in the animated series, and this was just the Beetlejuice Roadster, and it was a like a little, almost like a Ferrari, but with almost like a Batmobile style look. You could stick your Beetlejuice into the driver's seat. You could throw characters into sandworms. I'm just reading the box here. I could not find this. I didn't even know this particular vehicle existed. So as I remember, when I was a kid, and Christmas came on, I got a lot of these toys. It was also the same year when there were also the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles vehicles coming out. One of the vehicles was the Cadillac that the Foot Clan would drive. It's actually in the video games, and so I ended up using that as Beetlejuice's vehicle. That looked like what I remember in the animated series, and you couldn't really tell the difference. It almost could have been easily part of the Beetlejuice toy line. So that would be, just what I would use for that. And in a nutshell, that was all of Beetlejuice as far as the Kenner action figures were concerned. You know, there really wasn't a whole lot of playing value you could do unless you crossed it over with Ghostbusters or even with Batman if you want to have Michael Keaton's Batman against Michael Keaton's Beetlejuice. And again, there weren't a whole lot of villains. Like, what do you do with Beetlejuice? He just scares people, and what are you supposed to do with him in terms of, like, is he going to save the day? Is he going to save the Needle World from these neighborhood nasties? Kids, I don't think, really understand how to play with these toys, and they were probably too creepy for them. But my memories are so fond of just getting those toys in the Christmas of '89 and using that Ninja Turtles Foot Clan car, mowing down some of the other Beetlejuice characters and playing some Christmas music, playing Jackson 5, all those Motown stuff in the background. That that's what comes to mind when I think of the Beetlejuice toys, just for that particular period. Just so much fun for me personally, but I know they weren't as successful as Kenner probably would have hoped. Because in 1990, as I discovered later, there were an entire set of prototypes that were being planned, but now they were going to be based on the animated series. Some of them have surfaced online, others have not. but I could tell you now there were quite a bit that were supposed to come out. And to tell you the truth, there was nothing that I would have missed at all. Some of the prototypes that come to mind include a Beetlejuice pinhead bowler. So it's if you want to have Beetlejuice bowling somewhere, it's got pins, it's got him dressed up in a bowling shirt. I don't understand that one. There was a Dr. Beetlejuice dressed up like a surgeon, and his body could stretch. This also looks like something out of Ghostbusters. You also had the characters from the animated series, like Bully the Kid. It was like a baby's head on a cowboy. You had his friend. You had his pal Jacques Laline, who was the skeleton French dude from the animated series. It was one of Beetlejuice's buddies. I've only seen pictures of his prototype head. Nothing else that surfaced online in terms of the full action figure. And that was it. So Beetlejuice, there were no plans for a Lydia figure, no plans for Barbara Maitland, the Geena Davis character, nobody else from the movies or the animated series. However, I will add, though, that I can't necessarily just say yet that there were toys that I wish I had as a kid that we didn't get, because in 1990, we got a Happy Meal line, but it wasn't McDonald's, it was Burger King. And Burger King did a tie-in with the animated Beetlejuice series, and they created a bunch of small, kind of statuesque action figures from the animated series. So with this, you got the animated Beetlejuice toy, as well as Lydia. You got her parents, so you got the Deets, you got a Jacques Laline, and you got the Sandworm. And these figures, if you twist them around, like on the front, it would be those characters in their animated form, and in the back, it would be Beetlejuice in some form, whether he's like upside down behind Lydia, or maybe he's coming out of the backside of Jacques Laline, or he could be a little spider in front of Lydia's mom, or the back of Lydia's mom. So this actually helped me to fill those gaps of not having Kenner produce a Lydia Deetz or the other Deetz characters, and certainly was what made that collection feel complete for me in terms of playing with the Beetlejuice toys. But as I said, it wasn't really a long-lasting thing. While the cartoon really took on a life of its own and had some success over time, all the way through, like, say, 92, 93, the toy line never took off as well as Kenner would have hoped. And so by 1990, it was completely done, and nothing further after even the Burger King toys that had been released. And then in the 2000s, NECA would acquire a lot of these movie licenses and make action figures based on those films. And NECA not only made a Beetlejuice toy in the exact likeness of Michael Keaton from the movie, but they also did a figurine set of deadly accurate to the costumes, to the makeup, Beetlejuice toys of the Maitlands and the Beetlejuice in the striped outfit, as well as the spikes coming out of him. We got a sandworm, we got that voodoo character, and we got the skeleton creature that smokes too much, and we also got that hunter character that I mentioned, but now with his head shrunken and looking just like he did in the film. And so that really was something, I guess, for avid collectors and avid fans of Beetlejuice. These feel like something straight out of Tim Burton's closet, because they were just so deadly accurate, and certainly were not really toys to play with. They were more like display items. So NECA really filled the void for anybody that wanted the Maitlands and some of the other characters from the film. And that's it for Beetlejuice. There really wasn't much else to say about it. I can't go off without talking about why there was never a Beetlejuice sequel. Over the years, there have been many talks and plans of doing a second movie because of the success of the animated series. And obviously the character is iconic. And Michael Keaton has always wanted to reprise the role in some form. but it's just never been able to get the right idea to get everybody on board with. It was pretty close in the early 90s. There was supposed to be a movie where it was called Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, and it involved him, involved the Deeds. It had, you know, Beetlejuice on some Indian burial ground in Hawaii and the afterlife causing trouble, Beetlejuice being this hero winning a surfing contest. It was kind of like a wild idea, and everybody wanted to do it, but Tim Burton got busy with Batman Returns, so that didn't happen. And so they were just, Warner Bros. Was dragging their feet for the rest of the decade. People like Kevin Smith were offered to write a Beetlejuice sequel, but wouldn't go further with it. And Tim Burton was like always constantly back and forth, like, yeah, I want to do it. Then next time, like, oh, I kind of outgrew it. Michael Keaton would be the only one that would say, I would do it over Batman as long as I could get heard on the story that I have in mind. But it's just been too long, and even though Keaton recently had his comeback many years ago with Birdman and has since, headlined a number of hits like Spotlight and Spider-Man Homecoming as the Vulture, it just has not been enough to get Warner Brothers on board with making another movie. And Tim Burton's not the same filmmaker like he once was. Those days when he was doing the stop motion effects and just his old school sort of neo-expressionism style, it just seems non-existent for a guy that now seems to like have an obsession with putting Johnny Depp in every movie he does, and lately seems to be doing a lot of just forgettable, safe kiddie work, like Dumbo and Big Eyes. Things that just are far removed from the kind of filmmaker he used to be. Maybe that's just what happens when you start making big money. And as far as we know, there's just no plans for it. But there is a musical, and I think it's been pretty well received. There's a documentary that's supposed to be coming out sometime soon, if it hasn't already, on the making of Beetlejuice and the whole history with the animated series, the toy line, and the entire franchise in general. So it's still out there. It's still a classic movie, and maybe it's just one to leave alone. It fit its time, and God forbid they make a remake with another actor, because I don't think anybody could touch what Michael Keaton did. And I still think he could do it today in a heartbeat once he puts that makeup on. The energy will be there because the character doesn't age. So why not take the chance if you can? But if not, then don't touch it unless it's all the same people and they could put the same passion into it like they did back then. So that is it for the Silver Screen Action Figure Podcast today. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at SilverScreenAF1. If you want to email me with comments, suggestions, or ideas for new episodes, email me at silverscreenafpodcast@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook. And for our next episode, we're actually going to be breaking away from the formula, and we're going to do another interview. This time it's going to be related to the world of selling action figures and doing it in the mom and pop stores in our communities. So that's going to certainly be some interesting insight to have. And we'll still be talking about movie licensed action figures for the weeks to come. And I'm hoping you guys can all listen. And also, if you are interested in plugging your business on the podcast, or even if you worked for any of these companies like Kenner or LJN or Mattel, Hasbro, please contact me, because I want to interview you for this show, and I want to talk about the history behind these toys, the process, and just general thoughts on these lines. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'm going to just say, quite simply, sayonara.